Hey everyone, I want to talk to you about one of the unsung heroes of the art making process, what you put your art onto. In the art material industry, any two-dimensional thing you make art onto is commonly referred to as surfaces. This would be paper, board, panels, and canvas that we draw, paint, or print make onto. What I've found in talking to people new to the arts is that the surface is often the afterthought, the last consideration when choosing your art supplies. But in reality, it can be so important to the final results that in some mediums, it is considered to be the most important choice. I'm making this three-part series about surfaces, with this being the first part. In this part, we're going to talk about paper. In the second part, we'll talk about boards and panels. And in the third part, we're going to go into canvas. When these videos come out, I'll put links to them in the show notes below. You can also subscribe to the channel and then you'll get them in your feed. So let's talk paper. I am Mark and this is We Talk Art. The history of art is in many ways partly tied to the history of paper. Without the advent of paper, the art that we see, make, purchase would be drastically different. Prior to paper, art-making surfaces were primarily papyrus, parchment, vellum, wood, and various cloths, all of which worked but had some drawbacks for artists, top of which is they tended to be expensive and could be hard to get. True paper first came about in China during the 2nd century, that would be the Han Dynasty, and was accredited to Cai Lun. These papers were made of a variety of materials, but included mulberry bark and hemp. These new papers offered flexibility, they were light, they were absorbent for paints and inks, less expensive than previous options, and were much more available, and worked well for art. Japan started making their washi papers in kozo, gemshi, and mitsumata fibers, which are still used for sumi ink, woodblock printing, calligraphy, and much more. The Battle of Talas in 750 between China and Islam, I honestly didn't know about this one, resulted in paper making moving from the West into the Islamic areas, and with many things, they evolved it. Printmaking didn't really arrive to Europe until the 12th century, but did not really take hold as an art surface until the Renaissance. This is where we see paper transform art in the West. It allowed for sketching, studies, experimentation, and practice that expensive vellums and other options did not permit. Artists like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Dürer did a lot of their works on paper, and as a result, they are now known as the artists we think about when we think about the Renaissance. As I've expressed on this channel before, I credit sketchbooks, or basically the inexpensive abundance of paper, for a lot of my growth as an artist. As a result, I look at what happened in the European Renaissance as being fueled a large part by paper. And this didn't stop there. In the 19th century, machine-made wood pulp papers were even less expensive and even more readily available. Another point that shows the importance of paper to our society as a whole beyond art is the fact that many of these early paper mills in Europe and Asia are still here today. Fabriano paper mills in Italy were started in 1264, as Gary told us in that big trade show video a little while ago. Arches was founded in 1492 in France, and Hennemuller in Germany was founded in 1584. These are all papers that us artists know and love. In Asia, the Kuretani Washi Cooperative in Japan has a history going back 800 years. The origami factory history goes back nearly 300 years. The origami paper factory makes papers that are available here in the US and are quite popular. Although you can still purchase handmade papers made in traditional ways, modern paper making has made very high quality paper available at a very reasonable price. This makes for fantastic and affordable surfaces to make a variety of arts on. Modern processes have allowed wood pulp and cellulose, which was traditionally prone to yellowing and becoming brittle due to the acids in the wood, to be made whiter with much better stability and acid-free, which also means your art will last longer. Regardless, many premium papers are made from cotton, or some percentage of cotton, which offers more strength, flexibility, is absorbent, and more durable. All of these things combine to make great paper for a range of mediums. I feel all too often when someone wants to work on paper, they just use whatever is laying around. But what they don't realize is that there is a huge variety of papers available to the artist, and they have some distinctive characteristics that can have a substantial impact on how your artwork is going to look. Different papers can dramatically change the overall feel of your work, and in some cases it can be difference between success and failure. Many of the huge varieties of paper you might find in your local art supply store are often named for their intended purpose. Sketch, draw, pen and ink, marker, color pencil, mixed media, charcoal, pastel, and watercolor. So the name will be on there to tell you what those papers are used for. With that said, there's a handful of papers that retain their classical names, such as Bristol. And in England, they have a cartridge paper. But even if you go and purchase a paper that has the name you intend to use it for, you may find that there's still a lot of options and brand variations that make differences to your art. You will also find papers that are considered one type of paper, such as watercolor or printmaking, might be commonly used for something else like graphite drawing and pen and ink. What defines these papers for their intended use is the following attributes, which, if selected well, will make the paper ideal for your intended use. First is probably surface texture. The surface texture or tooth of the paper is a big factor in how well your chosen medium is going to work on it. Most pen and ink artists like a very smooth paper, while graphite requires some tooth to pull the graphite off the tool. But too much will make it hard to get a solid fill. Pastel and charcoal artists often like a lot of tooth, to the point that they sometimes will paint on 400 or 600 grit sandpaper, while different watercolor styles will push people from smooth hot press to moderate textured cold press to papers that are rough surface, like rough watercolor. You might find that the final texture of different brands may vary and may have different surfaces characteristics between paper lines, such as Bristol or watercolor paper. In the case of Bristol, it can be found in a plate, which is extremely smooth, or a vellum surface, which is very lightly textured. Watercolor usually, as I said, is available in a hot press, which is smooth, cold press, which is textured, and rough, which is very textured. Furthermore, one brand's cold press might be different from another. So, different manufacturers may have differences on how they define the surface names and what actually the texture is. So finding the surface that will make your work shine may take some testing. In the past, I've tried to show the surface texture on camera and to various levels of success, but I think I have a better plan. So I'm going to show you how these surface textures might affect you. Okay, here I have 3 papers. I have a hot press, a cold press, and a rough. And so what I have here is I have a block of 4B graphite, and I thought what I'd do is just kind of heavily go over this and create a tone with it. And you can see even the hot press isn't as smooth as some other papers, but when I get to the cold press, you're going to see a lot more tooth. And then if I get to the rough, even more tooth. So that should give you kind of an idea of what you're getting with these different papers. And so something like a smooth Bristol would even be smoother, and it would be easier to get in here and fill on all this. But even with a hot press, a good hot press paper, you can get this to be a fairly dense and smooth surface. And you'll see I have to work a lot harder with the cold press to get that same result. And then with the rough, it's probably near impossible without really burnishing down the paper. So there's your hot press, cold press, and rough papers. Next attribute will be weight. The weight of the paper will roughly correspond to the thickness of the paper. In the US, we use pounds as a designation for paper weight. So you'll see things like 80 pound, 100 pound, 140 pound, 300 pound, and even more. This weight refers to the weight of a ream of paper, usually 500 sheets, at the size it was manufactured at, which is usually different than the pad size. Despite the fact that this can invite a lot of variation between different brands, the reality is most paper of a specific weight feels very similar in its thickness. It is also important to know that some papers come from countries that use the metric system, which the paper weights there are measured in GSM, or grams per square meter. Because this includes the exact amount of paper, the system can be a little bit more concise. You can easily get a comparison chart between pounds and the grams on the internet, although most papers will show you both. It'll be pounds and GSM, or it may just say 160 G. Heavier weight papers will stand up to more abuse, working, and may endure more handling, shipping, and packaging better, although really heavy paper may not roll into a tube, so be aware of that. But heavy papers will also be less likely to wrinkle, fold, tear while you're making your art, and will have a higher level of opacity. These heavier papers will also handle more liquid, glue, or other products they may be using on them without deforming, curling, or becoming wavy. A heavier paper will also have a higher perceived value when you present it to a customer or a client, which can have some advantage. For wet mediums, heavy paper will absorb more water or paint, so techniques might be different as you move up to heavier papers. A few tests will tell you how you would adapt to that, but it just should be mentioned. The material that paper is made from is also a consideration and very important. As mentioned earlier, most affordable papers for dry mediums is going to be made with some combination of wood pulp or cellulose. Higher end papers and watercolor papers could be partly or fully made of cotton, although you can find some dry medium papers made from some or completely with cotton also. Cotton will often give the paper a more robust quality that will stand up to much more working, as I have said, with wet and dry mediums. For some processes, such as watercolor or printmaking, you may have to soak the paper until it becomes completely saturated, which is something that a wood pulp paper just won't handle very well. Again, cotton is a preferred thing for those kind of applications. Cotton can also give you a surface quality and a characteristic that some find a little luxurious and desirable to paint or draw on. It might be obvious, but cotton typically will make the paper more expensive. This is why you'll find alternatives that either have no cotton or only a percentage of cotton, ranging between 10% and as much as 75%. This is mostly in watercolor paper, but it is true of some dry medium papers also. Some companies are more recently using other fibers such as bamboo or hemp to make paper, resulting in a more sustainable manufacturing process. Because they both grow so fast, I don't have too much experience with these yet, so I'm not going to really comment on them other than to say they're available and they look to be nice papers. In addition, there has been a trend to offer recycled papers for drawing and sketching. For dry mediums, there is often less need to use the cotton paper, although some still will choose this over wood pulp-based papers for a ruggedness and or the surface quality. Some very good graphite artists I follow draw completely on 100% cotton, hot press watercolor paper for fantastic results. So keep that in mind. One new option for paper is mineral or stone paper. They have some unique qualities to them that you might find is good for your style. These papers are surprisingly versatile and work well with things that like a very fine tooth, but still has a surface that will pull graphite or color pencils. An interesting thing about these papers is some work very well for silver point, which is a classical technique of drawing with silver. Think Da Vinci. There's also some synthetic papers out there like Legion's popular Yupo paper. This is a polypropylene-based product that can be interesting for alcohol inks, watercolors, or gouache. The surface ranges from a glossy to a matte and comes in an opaque to somewhat transparent version. Mediums will sit completely on the surface of paper, behaving differently from just about any other paper you might try, and creates very vivid colors. Although some mediums might just rub off, so it could be fragile. You'll have to test it with your medium. Another point in choosing a paper is the long-term stability. It is important for some artists that the surface, material, and technique they use should survive the test of time. You don't want your paper to yellow, bleach your colors, or get fragile over time. By nature, wood pulp and cellulose is not acid-free and can suffer from all of these things if not properly treated. Fortunately, most art papers are treated and are 100% acid-free. Generally, 100% cotton is acid-free naturally and is a stable surface. Regardless, it's good to be sure whatever surface you're using is acid-free and stable over a long period of time, if that's what you want. One challenge when going outside the art material industry for surfaces, which many artists do, you must realize that these surfaces may not be stable for a long period of time. An example of this, I've seen some artists using cardboard. It can definitely give your work a distinctive look, but the surface is not stable over a long period of time and may eventually fall apart, interact with your mediums in a bad way, or just not work. So use it if you want that look, but know that it may not last. One attribute that's kind of hidden within the papers and in the names of the papers is going to be sizing. It is something that many brands use to manage water or paint absorption. This is important to paper used for water-based mediums, watercolor, water-based markers, or pen and ink. Typically, papers like sketch, draw, and charcoal papers may not include a sizing, or at least a sizing that's designed for wet mediums, and therefore these mediums may not work as expected for these different products. Sizing is a gelatin-like product that is added to and or put on the surface of the paper to manage how deep the water or paint will penetrate into the paper. With things like watercolor, much of the trick is to keep the pigment as close to the surface as possible for the best color quality, without it being too close to the surface that it could be easily damaged or scuffed. This is all handled by sizing. Different papers do this differently. Traditional, it was put on one or both surfaces, but now you'll find it added to the interior of the paper, so you'll get things like sizing on both sides and internally, giving the paper the best ability to prevent a medium from soaking all the way through the paper. This is often the case for mixed media papers that are designed for wet mediums. This is very desirable for art journals that you want to use both sides of the page. Almost all watercolor papers and mixed media papers are going to contain some sizing. Papers come in a wide range of formats. Most high-end papers for almost all applications can be purchased by the sheet. The common size for these sheets will be different for different types of paper. For instance, watercolor is usually 22 by 30 and printmaking papers are usually 19 by 24. But you will often find them in other sizes, either different manufacturing or cut down for retail. Many quality papers may be sold in oversized options also, some sheets going as high as 30 inches by 44 inches, and some are available in rolls. Depending on the type of paper and the manufacturing process, some sheets will have a deckled edge to it, which some artists prefer. You can create your own deckled edge by simply using a straight edge and ripping your paper. And that is how you can create a deckled edge pretty easily. But the manufactured deckled edge will be slightly different. You'll also find a wide range of papers and pads. These will be sized from as small as, well, this one's 3 by 4 inches, or smaller sometimes. And then you'll also see sizes that go beyond 20 by 24. The pads may be glue bound, such as this one, allowing you to fairly easily pull paper out with a smooth edge. Or they may be wired bound like this one, which allows you to take the paper and work on a sheet and then put it over and so forth. And these will hold the paper into this a lot easier, but still allow you to pull them out, although you get that interesting edge. You'll occasionally get pads that will be wire bound and laser perforated, so they come out a little bit easier. Lots of brands will also sell sketchbooks and art journals with almost any kind of paper you can imagine. These journals can be bound with a wire bound, just kind of like the pad, something like this. They have the advantage that they'll lay out flat and you can fold them over on themselves so that they're easy to work with. And a lot of them will have a rigid back so you can hold them or put them on your lap. While art journals or sketchbooks that have a book bound to them are a little bit classier and so forth, they may not lay as flat and in some ways might not be quite as manipulatable, but you get the classy look. And finally, watercolor papers will often come in what's referred to as a block, like this. And what it basically means is it's going to be glued on all four or on two sides of the block. For instance, this is open on the two sides, but has as glues coming down both sides. The goal of this is allows you to put a lot of water and working on these, and then as they dry, they will stretch back out to be flat, which can be a challenge for loose sheet watercolor paper, even thick stuff like 140 pound. When your painting is done drying, you can then cut it off the block using a knife or a bone folder. This is a bone folder. It's kind of a bookmaking tool. And then you can get that bone folder underneath that top piece of paper and then break this off. Now, if your paper is bound on all four sides, like Arches and Fabriano here, there's usually a corner, one corner left free like this, and you can get the bone folder into there and then break that that sheet off the top, getting your paper free and fairly flat. The last attribute you should give some thought to is the color of the paper. Depending on the type of paper, you may find that you have a lot of options for this. Yet, even with white papers, you might find quite a variation from a cool, bright white to a paper that tends toward a cream color, and even some neutral tones that almost go toward a gray. These subtle colors can actually have an impact on the feel of your final work. If you go away from white, you'll have to consider how your medium will look on the paper. Opaque mediums like gouache or some color pencils, pastels, charcoals will allow you to put them over very dark papers. But mediums that are transparent or semi-transparent, or maybe don't have a great pigment load, may get lost in darker colors. With that said, working with papers that are toned from white to gray to black or even blues or tans can be a lot of fun. This one here is a blue toned paper. And then I've done work for, in the past when I've done Inktober, that is on toned paper. And so you get this opportunity to add white and darks and push them all around. And it can be a lot of fun to do this. Even for normal sketches, it kind of tones it down a little bit. So these tone papers can be a really effective background, but you really have to test your mediums on that to ensure that they'll lay down and be opaque on them. Some ways of thinking about these tone papers when you're working on them is like when you work on a white paper and you add a dark medium to it, it's like removing light. If you work on a medium tone paper, such as a gray one like this sketchbook here, you have the opportunity to push your shadows back with black color, taking away light, and you can pull your highlights forward by adding light with an opaque white, which can be very effective. The paper tone then contributes the medium value. On a black surface paper, you can add light with the opaque white, which might feel very intuitive for you and can be effective if you try to avoid that 1960s black velvet painting look, unless of course that's what you're going for. Changing the way you think about your execution of your art will change your outcome. Combining these different attributes in different ways is how these brands create these range of papers that lend themselves to different techniques. If you like what you're seeing, please consider giving us a subscribe and give us a like. But now we're going to go on a field trip, so come along. So I am down here at my old store that I used to own, Nevada Fine Arts, and Mandy, the new owner, has allowed me to go in and do some recording in the store. So I'm going to walk around the paper section and we're going to look at some of the papers that have the attributes we just talked about so you can get an idea of what is available. Now, this isn't going to be a comprehensive list of all the options and types and brands, but I'll give you an idea on what brands are playing in what fields. So let's go in and take a look at this. Okay, as you can see, there are just lots of options within paper, and this is even to some degree just a small subsection of all the papers that are available by different brands. We're going to go down and look at certain options within this. So the first thing you're going to notice is a lot of times the paper is named for the application that it is going to get used for. So you have sketch and you have draw and you have color pencil and you have pastel and watercolor paper and mixed media paper. And so the name of the paper is kind of telling you what that paper is, the intent of that paper is. Now, you'll find that a lot of artists don't always use the type of paper for that particular application, and that's where understanding all the attributes we just went down and talked about is so important. So the first type of paper, we're going to kind of start at the thinnest type paper, and the most affordable is going to be sketch. And its value is that it's affordable and that you can draw in it a lot and not spend a lot of money. And it just gives you the freedom to be able to play and draw. And so if you're doing studies or life drawing, or you're doing tonal studies, compositional studies, you're trying to figure out hands, or you're trying to figure out faces or noses or eyes, this is a good medium. It has a great surface for graphite, and that's pretty much its benefit. The disadvantages of a sketch paper is it's usually fairly thin. You'll see like some of these are down to 50 pounds, which is a fairly lightweight, or 74 grams. So that's a fairly lightweight paper. And so it is going to be somewhat transparent. It is going to crease and fold and rip very easily, and it won't handle any liquid mediums at all. It won't be able to stand up to that very well. The other thing that you have to realize is there's a limit how much you're going to be able to work this, how much graphite you're going to be able to get on that paper, and how much erasing you're going to be able to do. So it is a cost-effective solution. For a lot of my things that I like to do, I will generally spend a little bit more to get a better paper. But having some sketch paper around can be beneficial. And again, there definitely is applications that it works for. Another option that's kind of below the sketch paper is then newsprint. And that's just basically the kind of paper that newspaper used to be printed on when they were doing that. It is generally not white. It'll be some level of an off-white or gray or even a tannish color. And it generally would not be acid-free. So this is not going to be a permanent solution. It's going to be even lighter than what you're going to see. So you can see this is a 30 pound or 49 gram. Very inexpensive, and it's a good option again for life drawing studies. You can get some huge sizes of it, as you can see here. So this one here is 18 by 24, and they even have a 24 by 36. So if you want to do large chalk, graphite, or various things, newsprint is a good option for that. So moving up in this line of papers to a slightly thicker paper and something that's going to be a little bit more robust is going to be the draw papers. Now draw will typically be somewhere around 80 pounds or 130 GSM, and that's a range. There's also some manufacturers will make a heavy draw, and that will get up to like 100 pounds, which is getting close to mixed media weights. And these papers are going to have a great tooth and surface to handle graphite. You could probably even put charcoals and other things like it, but it'll have the body and the heaviness to the paper that will stand up to things like heavy use of an eraser, or even possibly scratching into the paper using a craft knife or something, which some artists like to do. You can also use burnishing tools to push down the paper, and then when you go over it with graphite, you'll get like a white section, something like a whisker on a dog or a cat. So these papers are going to be better able to handle more advanced techniques and so forth. And as you can see, there's a variety, and they go, as I mentioned earlier, you can get some fairly small sizes, and then they go again to fairly large sizes, getting up into 18 by 24 or even sometimes larger. A category that's kind of a newer type paper is going to be some specialty papers, and you're going to see color pencil paper is a paper that's come out fairly recently and gotten pretty popular. There's a variety of different companies, including Beat Paper, that makes some color pencil paper. Strathmore definitely makes it, and then you might find it in some other varieties of paper. All these papers I've been talking about to this point are going to primarily be a wood pulp based paper or a cellulose based paper. So just consider that in your mix. Higher end in the draw, you're going to get into some Bristols and some other companies that will come in here and will give you some cotton or some percentage of cotton within these papers for doing drawing and so forth. But we're getting into heavier, more robust papers that will handle more working. So in the case of color pencil, often you're layering lots of layers of color pencil over. So combination of the tooth of the paper and the ability to handle that repeated laying down of those colors is going to be really important. Now, I know that some artists tend to move from draw. Instead of going to color pencil, they may go to Bristol. And you can see down here, there's two Bristols. And I mentioned that earlier. Bristol is a different manufacturing process that creates a stiffer paper for something that's the same weight. So in this case, this is a 100-pound paper, which is kind of the same weight as the heavy drawing paper, but in this case it has a much more substantial feel. It almost feels like a 140-pound or something like that paper. So Bristol papers are great for drawing, and they come in two surfaces. Actually, they come in three surfaces. So the majority of the brands will have a smooth that's going to be very smooth, and this might work for your colored pencils, pen and ink, and so forth. And then they also have a vellum surface. And one of the things to note is a lot of these brands do the same thing. And when you look at these two pads, on the surface, they look like the exact same thing, but somewhere on there, they're going to call out the surface. And so that's really important. The third type of surface is, I've only seen it on the more higher end papers, and that's going to be a plate surface. And so, for instance, this is a Bristol 500, Strathmore 500 series. And see, they have this is going to be a plate surface, which is going to be a very smooth surface. Now, Strathmore as a whole, if you have that available where you are, they have a system for designating the quality of their paper, and it's the series here. And so like this is a 500 series. So that's a professional level paper. They have a 400 series, which is also their higher end paper, and it's not in all. The 500 series is definitely not in all their paper types. So this style here, you're going to see at the top, it says 400 series, which is also one of their pro level products. It's just not quite as good as the 500 series. A lot of the 500 series are often 100% cotton, acid-free 100% cotton, ultra smooth, and that's what they're designating by the plate surface there. So it goes in those series. So it's 500 series, 400 series, 300 series is kind of a student grade, 200 series is kind of a kid's grade, and then you get a 100 series, which is kind of a young kids grade, which they don't carry all these series here, but just be aware of that when you're kind of looking at these papers. So if we take the next step, so if I go from draw, you get the color pencil. We've talked about Bristol having kind of a heavier and more rigid surface, or more rigid paper to it. You kind of get into a few more specialty papers, and one paper that's also fairly new is going to be marker papers. And the idea of marker papers, I talked about the sizing that they put into the paper. So the sizing in marker papers is specifically designed to keep that alcohol from alcohol markers from going all the way through the paper. If you've ever used a marker in something like a sketch paper, you know you draw a line on one page and you'll flip down the next page, it's on that page, and the next page, and the next page. And so these marker papers are designed to not allow that to happen, but also to keep the color, the pigment, at a level in the paper so it's much more vivid and much easier to see. And so you're going to get better results using something like a marker paper. Although I know some marker artists do like, again, Bristol as an option. So the Bristol Smooth actually does a pretty good job at marker. I would back yourself up, though, and put something between the pages. Even with this marker paper, if you're really heavy with your markers, you might put another sheet of paper between the page you're working on and the next page just to protect it. Another type of paper that I want to call out, and I think I've mentioned it in other videos, but Strathmore, Canson, Arches, and some of the other paper manufacturers are making papers that are specific so that you can put different types of paints right onto the paper. Again, this is probably due to sizing and then the thickness and weight of the paper. So this is a 246 gram paper. This is a pretty thick paper, and then they're going to use sizing to properly hold the paper, the paint on the surface of it so it doesn't disrupt the paper very much. They also are offering an oil paper. And so these papers can be, you can put these paints right on these papers. And I know that a lot of artists tend to like to use these for studies so they can work in their medium that they like, but work on paper, which is a lot easier and cheaper than working on canvas. So now we're getting into what's usually a thicker paper, but it's mainly going to be the surface quality. Charcoal and pastel papers come in a huge variety of papers. They're generally going to have a tooth that will capture the charcoal or pastel. They are not always going to be white. You'll sometimes find these in a huge varieties of color that will allow you to work, as I kind of described, working from a neutral tone and adding light to it and subtracting it with darker and lighter colors. It does require opaque mediums. Most pastels are opaque, but you could use gouache and other things on that. And so within this idea of charcoal and pastel paper, there is kind of a range of papers that are available for that. So Canson has a really popular meat tint line, and they sell these in individual sheets. Clairefontaine, sells the pastel mat. And this is a really interesting one because it has a really interesting kind of slightly spongy surface to it, but it really traps the powdery substances like pastel or charcoal and can allow you to paint on it very nicely without what they claim not needing to fix those products on this material. So I do not have a ton of experience with it, but it is very popular. You can see it comes in a huge variety of colors, and it comes in a large variety of sizes also. And then we get into a category that I use just all the time. As you know, I've recommended this, which is the Strathmore Visual Journal. It has a 500 series, 100% cotton mixed media paper in it. This is just really one of my favorite books. It comes at a really nice price point. And Nevada Fine Arts is selling it for $13.73. It's great. The disadvantage is I did talk to Strathmore at the trade show, and they said this is discontinued. There's still quite a bit of it in the channel. I'm actually going to buy one today, so I have one because it's my favorite. I actually talked to someone that said there is an internal discussion about possibly bringing it back. So if you want to email Strathmore and say, oh, please bring this back, I would definitely appreciate that. But fortunately, within the mixed media arena, there is a huge variety of mixed media papers available. And what you're going to get with a mixed media paper is usually it's going to be somewhere around 100 pounds or 160 GSM. And it is going to be a variety of surfaces. This is where you have to be a little careful. For instance, I find that the Visual Journal has a vellum surface, which works really well for charcoal. I can put watercolor on it. I can put pencil on it. The slight amount of tooth tends to work for a lot of things, mixed media. So who would know? But I have found some mixed media papers, such as the Fabriano mixed media paper that I don't see here, has more tooth than usually works for a lot of the products that I like to use in it. So really check this, and you'll notice that if it's calling out that it is a dry medium, like in this case, it is going to have tooth to it. So just be aware of that. This dry medium probably will not work well for pen and ink. It's not going to work well for markers because of that tooth. Color pencils, probably not a good choice for that paper. There are also going to be wet medium or fluid mixed media papers. And so these are going to have sizing that are going to more lend itself to fluid kind of products. This feels like a vellum surface to me. So that would be a paper that I would probably like. But you playing and figuring this all out is really going to be an important aspect. You just don't want to come down here and buy one of these without kind of looking at what you're getting. The other thing with mixed media papers is they'll often get into colors. And so they'll, again, will have different kind of colors, which is great if you're working with something that is opaque. If you're working with markers, water-based or alcohol, or you're working with watercolors or any other paint that's going to be transparent, you may not want tone to your paper. But if you're working with opaque mediums, it can be a lot of fun. You can see this cover picture right here gives a good example of what is possible. by laying down. So this is nearly the tone of the paper, and you can push back your darks and you can pull forward your lights by using whites and blacks, and it creates a really nice effect. It also works really well for monochrome. Okay, and this is when we get into watercolor paper. And this is probably when you're going to find that the whole discussion of cotton versus wood pulp or cellulose is going to be the most important. Most watercolorists will insist that you paint on 100% cotton watercolor paper. And I tend to concur. Watercolor paper for certain mediums is actually the most important thing. So watercolor, the type of paper you use, is going to make all the difference in the world. It is the most important thing you're going to select above the paint and above the brushes. This is also true with color pencils. So when you get into a color pencil medium, is the paper is going to make or break your drawing. So if you are not using the right paper for your colored pencils, you're going to have a miserable experience. So choose your paper as a priority when you choose that medium to work in. So as I said, in watercolors, 100% cotton is generally the preferred thing, but 100% cotton typically tends to be expensive. You are much better off, if you're trying to save money, choosing a non-cotton watercolor paper and using that over trying to put watercolor on anything else, including mixed media to some degree, although I do have an okay time putting watercolor on mixed media, but I've been doing it for a while. So if you're looking to put watercolor on mixed media papers, then it may not be a great place to start. I would definitely start with possibly a wood pulp based watercolor paper. But if you can afford the money, then I would recommend the 100% cotton. Now the next thing you're going to get with watercolor papers is going to be the weight of the paper. The most common weight for a lot of the watercolor paper that people like the most is going to be this 140 pound or 300 GSM. It's a fairly thick paper, and it will handle water really well. The watercolor you're going to put on it will allow you to put a lot on it, and it will tend to buckle and curl a little bit, but not nearly as much as a thinner paper. The step down from that is going to be a 90-pound paper, of which I am not seeing one here, but all these are 140 pound. Oh, here we are. So this is actually, I was telling you this series. So this is a Strathmore 300 series. So this is kind of a student grade. And then we get into the 200 series, which is a really affordable option. And it is 90 pounds or 190 GSM. So this is going to be a thinner paper. It is a wood pulp based paper, and it probably won't be quite hold up to a lot of very intensive work, but it is going to be more affordable. So the brand that a lot of people in our area and generally in the United States really loves for watercolor paper is going to be the Arche, which we call arches here, but it's Arche I believe in France. Someone's going to tell me I'm wrong on that. But anyway, Arche's watercolor paper is the preferred brand for a lot of people. It's also fairly expensive, but it's 100% cotton, and it's a really beautiful watercolor paper. And if you can afford it, definitely the way to go. But there are some competitors. One of the ones that kind of comes out and does a really good job with 100% cotton paper that I tend to like is going to be the Fluid, and the Fluid 100 is going to be their 100% cotton watercolor paper, and they're changing I believe that the new cover of that looks more like this. That was the old style I was just showing you, but they also have a non 100% cotton watercolor paper. It's actually going to be a wood pulp based paper, of which, so this is the Fluid wood pulp based paper. It's still a decent paper, it's just not 100% cotton. So this is going to be kind of a budget option, and that's what that looks like. So the three attributes of the watercolor paper are going to be the weight. 140 pound is good, 300 pound is really heavy, and then 90 pound is really thin. The next is going to be what it's made out of. 100% cotton is good. Otherwise, wood pulp is the next best. If you and I do that before trying to do watercolor and any other kind of paper. And then the third is going to be a texture, a surface quality. And so the two really primary ones you're going to see on a lot of these are going to be hot press, which that's a hot press watercolor paper, that's going to be very smooth. And then the other kind of surface that you're going to see is going to be cold press, which is right there. And that's going to have a rougher, more texture. And I kind of talked about that previously in the texture part, and I try to show you some examples of what those look like. A lot of watercolor papers will also have a rough paper, although it's much less common to see that in pads or in blocks. And that's the final characteristic. So a typical pad looks like a pad of paper that you're used to. It's usually going to be, for watercolor paper, it's going to be glue bound. So these will rip out very easily, opposed to the ring bound, although here's watercolor, it's ring bound. That allows you to keep it in there easier and flip it over on itself and it lays flat. So it has some advantages. But the more common type of paper that people tend to like, so the other format that you're going to find watercolor in is going to be in blocks. And so Fluid makes what they call an easy block. And that means that it is glue bound on two of the sides. And then the other sides are not glue bound. This allows you to pull this paper out. But the whole idea of a block, Arches, by the way, glues it all the way around. But this allows you to get this paper extremely wet, paint on it, and then let it dry, and it'll dry fairly flat, and that's the advantage of a block over a pad. Again, Arches will glue bound theirs all the way around, and the trick to get these off is you're going to use a knife or a bone folder or something, butter knife, and there's one corner that's going to be open, and you kind of get it in there, and then you can break that edge off of that pad. And as I talked about earlier in the format section, a lot of these papers come in sheets, and you can get a huge variety of sheets of these papers. You have the Me Tints, which is a pastel and charcoal paper, and it comes in a huge range of colors. There's craft papers that you can get in sheets, but then there's a variety of drawing papers, so you can get mixed media and Bristol and a whole range of those kind of what we saw on the pads over there in sheets, and that these are 18 by 24. And then watercolor papers are also come in sheets, and they will range usually, as I said earlier, in the 22 by 30, and you can get hot press and cold press in 90-pound, 140-pound, and 300-pound papers, and with the different surfaces of a hot press, cold press, and rough. Another nice option for papers is you can get a lot of these papers in a roll, and this is a very affordable if you're going to do either a lot of drawing or a large format work. You can get most types of papers in rolls. It's not going to be as vast of options as you're going to find in the pads or even the sheets, but you will find a range of papers that you can get in a roll format and do very large work, which is kind of exciting. And then the final format that is really good to work with is journals. And there's a whole range of journals. Stillman and Brin make amazing mixed media journals.
They do have the Stillman Burns.
Yeah, and those are really good. And then that Handbooks is a great watercolor journal. And then I think I talked about this to the show. The Art Creations by Royal Talons is a good mixed media book. Very thin pages, but you get a lot of pages in there, and it will handle most mediums ultimately. A couple of specialty papers I mentioned really quickly is Yasutoma makes a mineral paper. And as I said, this actually works for a huge range of different mediums, but it includes a silver point, which is kind of a unique thing. So if you ever want to try an ancient process of drawing, that's a good option. And it has a really fine, interesting surface. It's fairly thin, but it's real rugged, doesn't rip easy. Might be a fun paper to play with. And then we have Yupo, and this is the polypropylene paper. So it's not wood, and it's not cotton. It's actually kind of a plastic surface. Whatever you put on it is not going to soak into it, so it's going to dry on the surface. And that has some challenges because it will, some paints will want to skitter across the top of it. But the other side of it is when it dries, it is laying on the surface, so you're going to get a really vivid colors with this. Yupo is really popular with alcohol inks and watercolors and gouache. but it could be used for a variety of other things. Let's see what they have here. They have watercolor, alcohol inks, and acrylics. And I would add gouache to that. So, okay, we're back in the studio, and there's one final thing I'd like to go over that can make a big difference for your paper. If you like to work with paint or pastels on a standard paper type, such as perhaps in an art journal or a sketchbook, you might want to consider treating the paper with a primer or a ground. You can use a standard gesso, which is the ground that's applied to most canvases that you buy. This will work very well for oils and acrylics and may even improve the paper for things like oil pastels or paint markers. You can use the papers that I showed you at the art store for oils and acrylics, and you can put those right on there with no additional priming, but using the gesso will allow you to put that on any paper. In addition, there are several companies including Golden, Daniel Smith, Winsor & Newton that sell grounds with different characteristics that lend themselves to different things like watercolor or pastel. These grounds will allow you to work with these mediums in things like sketchbooks, on wood panels, or on non-art surfaces like walls, or in some cases glass or plexiglass. You can get these grounds in many different colors, and some of them come in clear. You can also add color in the form of acrylic paint to get about any color that you want to use as a background. I hope you enjoyed this rundown of paper and gave you some ideas on different surfaces you might apply. Our comment sections have gotten really active over the last few months, and if you want to see more about this discussion, please head down to the comment section and interact with some of the other artists that are active down there. This is also where you can leave questions or comments, and I try my best to look at all of them and respond to them. Keep an eye out for the final two parts of this series. They will cover boards and panels and canvas. I'll put 2 more videos up on the screen here and here that you can click on and watch more We Talk Art, or go make some art.